This is Baruch Fleischman, and we're in our class now on the Zohar. The Zohar Parshat of the week, Parshat Lech. The question is, why have I gotten the Ramke here in Cold Soma? So we talked about this in the last lecture, but we want to flesh it out a little bit more. So what we want to talk about here, because in the Zohar that we're going to be reading today, it's going to bring us into some of the concept of the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu and where it's manifest. And we need to know some of these concepts. So we start with the bottom word, which is actually a conglomeration of letters. The word is pronounced Cold Soma. Now what this means is that it actually, from the right to the left, is from the outside to the inside of different clothing in which the light of the Ein Sof, represented by the letter Aleph, is clothed. So we have Kalim, as I've written that up above. Then we have Levushim, so inside of the Kalim and Levushim. Then there is Slamin, another concept called Slamin. And then there are Mochim. We hear this word all the time. It's mentioned in Mochim. And Mochim is really, what's beyond the Mochim is really hard to understand. It's ununderstandable because that's where the Or is located. Now, if you want to go further, though, open another door. And now you see that we have the light clothed. But now let's look at the light itself. That light is called Neramchi. And the words below it say that the first Nun represents Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Now, these ideas are contained in many places in the Eitz Chaim and the Otras Chaim, but here we're just reading it as we're learning the Zohar. So Nefesh represents the most physical part of the light. This is the light. This is the light. Inside of that is a Ruach. Inside of that is a Neshama. Now, inside of them is called Chaya. In our Zohar, it's going to be called Neshama of Neshama. And then there's a concept of Yechida. Yechida is the most outside of all of these lights. Now, what does it mean by outside here? It's a little bit hard to hear. Is the Nefesh is going to be the most concrete, most physical part of the spiritual aspect of a human being. It pervades all of our organs, which we had been learning previously in Parshat Pinchas, about how the organs are really manifestations, or they have the energy sources where they come from. After that is Ruach. Now, Ruach is a really difficult word to explain, but normally it goes with the Or, which is the concept of Zeranpin. So Nefesh would go with the concept of Malchus. Ruach would go with the concept of Zeranpin. Neshama will go with the concept of Bina then, because Bina pours into Zeranpin. Now, the thing is like this, is that Chai and Yechida are different, though. Chai and Yechida are what they call Oros Makifim. They don't come in. They're not inside. They're too powerful. So the Chaya is a light that can go in and does go in, and we see this in the Otras Chaim, and maybe I'm looking for Chavrusa, actually, for Otras Chaim. I'd like to get started over there. So the Chaya is a light that could go in, but has to come back out because it's too strong for the Keli to be able to hold it, which is this Cold Soma. And then finally is Yechida, which is even further away. It's a much greater light, much closer to the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So with this, as we have a little idea now that let's just review it again. The concept of the lavush of that is the clothing of the light is called Cold Soma. And then we come over and we see that the Cold Soma is actually composed of 4 different types of wrappings of the light. Kalim, they're called Kalim, Levushim, Slamim, and Mochim. Now this is mostly seen in the Rishash, but here it is. The last part is called Oros, and the Oros are right up above. There are the lights. The lights are the light of Nefesh, the light of Ruach, the light of Neshama, the light of Chayim, the light of Yechida. So this is a little lesson, just another door to look at and to get an idea. Just for example, you could take the word Neranchi and you could make it into Ner, which is another word that we could break down, which in fact the Rishash does, and also of Nechi. Nechi represents, well, we'll learn about this a little bit now. Let me bring the Zohar over here. And let me see how much time I have. Okay, we have a little time. Let's look here on at the very top of the page, we read the Zohar itself. See if I can get away with this. The Zohar says, Kutra Barichu, Romans Chochma Yilo Abraham over Yitzchak. So there is a remes to the upper Chochma that exists in Abraham and Yitzchak. That's what he says. Abraham da nishmasa lenishmasa. Abraham really represents the Neshama, that, and when he uses words like this, he means Neshama. Always in Zohar, in Kabbalah, means panemius, means what's inside, it goes inside. So come from a higher place, and that is what when we use the word Neshama. Remember that the three words, Naran, which are also called Naran, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, are used all the time. The other two, the Chaya and the Yechida, are rarely used. Over here, he refers to Chaya, which is the light. It is a makif, a surrounding light. It's too great. He said, great. It's very pure. So it's called the Nishmasa, the Neshama. Bi'ihi Neshama Doki Sarah. So he says, you want to know what the Neshama, the Jewish, maybe mean the Jewish people? It's our Sarah Imenu. Lot. Let's talk about part of the family of Abraham Abinu, right? Because this is our Parshat. Dohu Nachash Ubaz Zuge. So this is the serpent and his wife. Dahaku Samakel. Samakel is the name of the channel of evil, the name of the channel of the Yetzer Hara. That part which pulls us away from Hashem. It comes male and female. Ruach Kadisha da Yitzchak. So the word Ruach, he says, goes with Yitzchak. The word Nefesh Kadisha da Rivka, that's Rivka. Nefesh refers to Malchus. So we would say that Yitzchak over here in this case would refer to, let's go backwards. He's going to actually go through this more. He says that Rivka is going to represent Malchus. Yitzchak is represents Zer Anpin. And he's going to say that what he had over here is Sarah is going to be the Neshama. So then he said Yetzer Hara. Let's talk about the Yetzer Hara. Da Ruach HaBehema. So we have another name for it. So if anybody's familiar with Tanya, the Baba Shechsidus, you've seen this word, or he says Nefesh Behema, Abahamis. That's what they call it over there. But this is a similar idea. It's called the Ruach, which is the breath of an animal's breath. So he said, what's the metaphor? Al da Amar Shlomo. And on this, Shlomo HaMelech said, B'chochmasa, in his chochma, Mi yodea ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'olahi. Who knows if the ruach that is in man's ruach, our breaths, are going to good places? What's his words here? He says, ha'olahi, if it goes up. Nefesh Abahamis, then there's a Nefesh Abahamis, and do Nefesh Besitra, the Yetzer Hara, that's the Nefesh of the Sitra of the Yetzer Hara. So what do I conclude from this? He's telling me that all of these things in the round key that we just looked at, let me flash it onto you again, it exists on both sides. There's the side of Kedusha and the side that's not Kadosh. It will never be Kadosh. It's rowing in a different way. That's the side of evil. Now let's look over here, and now we can learn the Matak Midivash. It's down the bottom of the page, and let's see if we can pick up a little bit. Right now we're at 8 minutes. I try to keep these like as close to 10 minutes as possible. The nishmasa is ar legavra b'yira b'chochmasa. So what they say? He said, V'al zeh amro shahaneshama. He said, the neshama of the neshama, that's the chaya. Misoreres ubo la'adam kafi yirasa v'chachmaso. If you want to have the light of the Ein Sof shine upon you like the sun, then you have to have these ingredients, yirasa, a person's man's fear of heaven, v'chachmaso, and how much Torah he knows. Kechan neshama, the neshama, because that aspect, which is so high, called a makif. Shorsha misfiras ha-chochma, its root is in the sphere of the chochma b'tzila sheba he yira ilah, because in that chochma, the chochma b'tzilus, then we see the upper fear. What is this fear? He says reishas chochma yiras Hashem. That's a phrase we have. So chochma really requires reverence. Nishbasa yisa'ara the inish bebina. Then he said the neshama. Now we're moving along to these different words in Naranchi. Don't forget your Naranchi. According to person's understanding, his ability, because bina goes with neshama. So we have matches of different ideas that is lights to partsufim, lights to spheros. Behind the kafit teshuva, according to a person's tshuva, also, as he comes back, Sheba Bina, that Sheba Bina is the concept of coming back, and repentance. Kihan Neshama Shorsha Mesviras of Bina, because the concept of Neshama, its root, is in Bina. And this is the meaning of this phrase, V'yomer la'adam hein yiras Hashem hi chochma. This is the pasuk, the yiras Hashem is chochma. Hare shiras Hashem, what is the shir of Hashem? Zeichel l'chochma, a person who sings to Hashem. He's merits chochma. So the Zohar goes on, and the Matuk explains. Ritzon Lomar, Lechaya. Lechaya is again the Neshama, Shemakora b'chochma, who has a root in chochma, because we said the concept of chochma goes with the concept of chaya, which is also known as the Neshama. The Hemshek of pasuk, who the continuation of the pasuk is Vasur Me'ra Bina, and then turn from evil, that's Bina, which is the Neshama, Pirish. So he explains, Haser me, or I think maybe Huser Me'ra, that remove yourself from evil, but also the tshuva, and come back to Bina. Who's Zeichel the Bina, that person who does tshuva merits Bina. And here the Matok comes and explains again. Ritzon Lomer, he says, the Neshama Shemakora B'Bina, so the root of Neshama is found in Bina. Possession cause of Nishmasa is the Arab of the Tshuva de Iskre Bina. So the concept of Neshama, what we understand is the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu that is inside of us. When somebody says the Pintel Yid, and they say, hey, that's the concept of the Neshama. What does he mean? He means what's inside of it, the most panimi part of what is inside of us. Remember, the Chai is too big to be inside of us. It's the greater light of consciousness. So this consciousness that we're able to achieve comes from Bina, and it's called Neshama. HaNeshama misareres b'bo la'adam v'yedech tshuva. So how do you get a Neshama? How do you highlight the Neshama? How do you kindle it? You do it by tshuva, shosha b'bina, which has a root in Bina. Vikres asara. There's another word for this. Another word for this is called Sarah, like Sarah Imenu. HaNeshama nikras Sarah kanal. The Neshama is called Sarah. The Ruach hu hakol. The Ruach is the concept of voice, because you don't have a voice without a breath. So, that's just the sound of kol. So he says, Ruach hu hakol v'iskre das, and it's also called das. Why? Because the kol is the concept. We have to put it together like this. The kol is the concept of the middle line. Das, Teferes, which is Zeranpin, Yisod, and Malchus, that's the middle line. The Ruach Shorsho B'Zeranpin, and the Ruach, it has its root in Zeranpin. These are very important metaphors to put these things together. This is a straight limud. He said, the Nikra Kol, the Nikra Das. It's also called voice. It's called Das because that is which permeates. It's a permeator like a voice. Because are the Inish, the Saleh Kolib or Raisa. How do you arouse this Ruach? By lifting up your voice, arousing your voice with Torah. Who raises up his voice for Torah when he's learning. The Iskre Torah Shebechsav. Now imagine, just practically speaking, you're in the base of Medrash. You're all by yourself, or you're with a jillion different people. Or you're there and you lift up your voice as you're learning, you start to get into it. This will bring Ruach through that breath. Now let's see if he gets the Nefesh. Now he explains Nefesh. Nefesh, Hasichlis is armine uvadim tovim. So he has this word he calls the Nefesh, the conscious, or the mental Nefesh. The concept, the spiritual aspect of Nefesh. Well, my Nefesh Hasichlis. Misorer ha'adam la'ose maisim tovim. So this here awakens a man to maisim tovim. Nefesh hasichlis is ar minei ovadim tovim. So when you do good deeds, acts of loving kindness, it arouses this nefesh sichlis, which he calls it. But the nefesh hasichlis, this conscious nefesh. Misorder ha'adam la'asos maisim tovim. It awakens arouses a person to do maisim tovim, and the same thing is that your maisim tovim arouse your nefesh. And that's the Torah here on the Zohar for today. This is Baruch Fleischman. I am at the Tikkun